Hello, welcome everyone to the second webinar for Wine Future 2021. In this session, we are going to be focusing upon our 3 donation recipients from around the world. SOS Cape Town, Porto Protocol, and North Bay Jobs with Justice. And before we begin this session, I want to let you know that we have new developments on our website. Please check it regularly. We have new speakers that have been posted in the last couple of days. We are developing new sessions, and there'll be more information to follow. So do check back and look for our media releases as well. The previous webinar, the first, occurred 2 weeks ago today with Mike Veseth and Stephen Ramiclev. That full presentation is available on the website for you to stream as you wish on the webinar page of the Wine Future 2021 website. This will also be posted in the coming days when this concludes, as will the third webinar to occur on December 2nd on digital events and marketing issues with Luis Torres. And now on to our donation recipients. With us from the Porto Protocol is Marta Mendoza, excuse me for the pronunciation. I always lose the N in your name.
That's fine.
It's very good. Mara Ventura with North Bay Jobs for Justice. And Shelley Humphreys of Cape Town SOS, excuse me, of SOS Cape Town. Thank you for all this. So let me just throw this question open. You all have presentations to provide. I'm sure you're very capable of that. But before we launch into each one of your individual worthiness, why it is you're here and what it is you're proposing to the world, can I ask that the 3 of you kind of detail for us why it is you see Wine Future 2021 as a potentially really good link for what it is you're about?
I can start.
Thank you, Mara.
Hi, I'm Mara. And as David said, I direct the nonprofit in Sonoma County, North Bay Jobs with Justice. And in Sonoma County and in the North Bay, we're considered wine country. That's our nickname, that's what we're called, and we're proud of that. But we also recognize that in order for our wineries and our wine industry and economy to thrive, it does so with a very large swath of workers that are oftentimes low-wage workers, that are immigrant workers, they're indigenous workers, and their parents and families and women. And this is a huge part of what our organization does, is ensure that those workers go to work every day with dignity and respect. We make sure that that means they have livable wages, that they have access to health benefits. And the current work that we'll talk about in a little bit today is really ensuring that as we deal with some of the most historic fires these days and floods, among everything else, that the recovery ensures that they are able to recover equitably with everyone else in our community. So, you know, that's a big reason why we see ourselves connected with so many of you all that are here at this conference and are in the wine industry.
Thank you, Mara.
I'm happy to speak. Hi, everyone on the other side of the screen. Thank you for being there. Now, looking at the relation between your Wine Future event and Porto Protocol, there couldn't be a more natural link, as we at Porto Protocol are about the wine future and present for that matter, as we look at climate solutions, or rather saying we look at climate change from a solutions perspective rather than the problem perspective. And therefore, all the challenges that the wine industry as a whole at a global scale is facing today is exactly what we're trying to tackle in a collective fashion.
Thank you, Marta.
Hi, I'm Shelley from SOS in Cape Town. We know that climate change is going to affect the deprived and the already disadvantaged the worst. We in SOS work specifically with one large informal community in Cape Town, which is in Kraaifontein. which is right next door to Stellenbosch, which is the winelands, as we know, of Cape Town. And a lot of those residents within Blumenbos are casual workers that work within many of the wine estates in that area. And those are the ones that we are obviously assisting in the wash sector. So we work within water and sanitation. So yeah, that's basically the link there in terms of wine futures and climate change.
And thank you, Shelley. Shelley, as long as we have you here, can you please perhaps give some examples of how it is SOS has worked directly with your clients in developing your sanitation and hygiene practices?
Yes, so we started working with Blumenbos, which is the fastest growing township within the Western Cape. And it's actually the most underdeveloped. Within Cape Town, there's around 6 or 7 large informal communities, townships, such as Khayelitsha, Langer, Bishop Lavis. And this one tends to get sort of forgotten about because it sits on the border between the municipality of Cape Town and the municipality of Stellenbosch. And it's the most underdeveloped in the sense that there are no formal like community halls, there's no business hubs. It's very, very all shanty dwelling. There's no sort of brick structures. And it tends to fall between the cracks of both municipalities. And that's why we chose to focus on that development. There's around 70,000 residents, 70,000 people that live within this area, mainly 5-6 to 1 shanty dwelling, and there are no proper structure there in terms of water or sanitation. They have portaloos which sit around the edge of the township, and they have communal taps. So it's very much a lot of people sort of going and collecting water and taking it back to where they live. And some of these community taps are very far from where they live in terms of how large the scale is. So what we've been doing is specifically working within the township and schools. There's 14 schools within that area, no-fee schools, and they're all horribly overprescribed, normally doubles. There's between 50 to 60 students in a class. And they have very, very poor sanitation. Their ablutions are in dire states. Most of them don't have even proper running water. Most of them don't even have doors. So what we've been doing is doing lots of ablution upgrades, and we've also been installing sort of huge 5,000 litre water tanks into the schools and into certain areas.
So it seems that much of what you're doing is based on infrastructure development. It's at that level that this is really critical to the services that you are providing. And Mara, I know that we've had a conversation earlier about this. There's some of this that comes into play with what you're doing as well. Mara.
Yeah, sorry. Can you
okay.
The full question?
Yeah, no problem, Mara. I'm just trying to use this as a springboard to some of the work that you're doing. The infrastructure issues are somewhat reflective of that you're dealing with, are somewhat reflected in what Shelley has said in terms of providing essential services, especially now during this critical time, to your clients.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, just to say, we had to start an Undocu fund, the first in the nation, to ensure as far back as 2017 that we just had cash aid to provide for people impacted by the fires. And even though that started in 2017, we were still giving funding out at the beginning of this pandemic this year, because that's really how long the recovery was going, and because our communities, particularly our farm worker communities, kept getting hit with more natural disasters. And so we had this infrastructure in place, and that really allowed us to be able to expand the amount of services we were able to provide this year to not only quickly pivot to COVID support in terms of how farm workers were getting hit with outbreaks at their wineries, and also just wineries that were closing down to be fair to restrictions from our governor. But then also we were hit with 2 more fires this year. So we had to expand to gift cards, and we had to expand to emergency bags, and we purchased emergency bags that were able to send folks into the wineries in the field to give them battery operated radios and flashlights and emergency equipment so that they could evacuate safer. And finally, N95 masks, which we know are the only way to fully protect yourself while working in times of wildfire. And unfortunately, as we'll talk about today, our farm workers are taken into mandatory evacuation zones so they could be in places with intense wildfire smoke. So we had to really think critically beyond cash aid about what else our communities needed.
I see an overlap a little bit between what the two of your organizations are contending with. Yours may be more fire-based, whereas Shelley's are more water-based, though there's obviously overlaps into all that. Marta, what is your perspective on this, especially as regards to the development of Portal Protocol in its development?
Well, first of all, it's an amazing work that you are both doing in different parts of the world. You are dealing with water, Shelley, which is, as we know, it's life. So it's by far the most, regardless of climate change, it's life. And Mara, I mean, we know, and we've had, and that touches actually what we do at Portal Protocol. One of the things I felt throughout the last few months was speaking to some of our American producers that are members of Portal Protocol, was they were experiencing climate change firsthand. And that is something that completely changes the way you want to act towards it. And that, I mean, we've had members telling us that climate change is now their biggest priority. Of course, from where you stand, which actually from where both of you stand, it's about primary needs for people. It's what they need to put food on the table and to deal with having water and having food and being able to go to work, especially when they have no conditions, regardless, not only with the fires, but with the pandemic, with everything. And from where we stand and the relation to Portal Protocol and to climate change is that these are issues that have everything to do with climate change. More and more, what we see is that social equity and social equity and social needs are just as part of climate change. Another thing that it's more and more affect is that climate change affects more people in need than certain parts of the society. So I think all these subjects need to be addressed as part of this crisis that we're all experiencing. And that's how I see, of course, the relation to climate change. It's true that we focus more on, as an institution, that we focus more on another way of collaborating between producers around the world, not just producers, the wine value chain as a whole. But these are key issues for this crisis that we are experiencing.
Marta, in that, how do you view the wine businesses that are members of Portal Protocol? How do you view their perspective on these issues? Do they see, are they yet able to accept that these social inequities that you touched upon, do they see this as very, very much linked to the issues of the climate crisis and how to approach what they do in their businesses?
I cannot say that is a reality through all the members, because I must admit we haven't had that conversation with all about that specific topic. But I can tell you that, again, in the last few weeks, I recall speaking to two members in completely different parts of the world, telling me exactly that we cannot talk about sustainability, not so much just climate change, sustainability, and even climate change without talking about social equity. And so more and more, I think that's a topic on the table. And there's this relation between the fact that we have to think about social justice as much as we have to do about climate change, and these are completely interconnected. So yes, there is a growing connection, and there is a growing, how should I say, more and more members are bringing this topic to the table as part of discussing climate change in whatever matter.
Mara, back to you for a moment. The history of North Bay Jobs with Justice goes back to 20 years now. to its original inception within the context of another organization. And early in that timeline, there was healthcare initiatives that were implemented as part of what these groups were doing. Can you touch upon the stream of healthcare that has been helped moved along by your organization and the sister organizations, culminating in the recent minimum wage ordinance that you helped to pass in your area?
Yes, absolutely. Again, bringing it back to farm workers, one thing that we know is that up until a few years ago, 9 out of 10 farm workers had no access to any kind of health benefits at all, including private or otherwise, but particularly around their employers. But in general, part of the work we do is research. And in looking at data and commissioning reports by some of our local universities, we found that this was really across the board, that a majority of low-wage workers were Latino, they're Indigenous, and they're women, and that they're the average age of 33. So we're looking at adults, we're looking at people who want to buy a home or possibly have children to take care of. So this really became a large problem in our community that we needed to address, not just health in terms of being able to go see a doctor, which is a huge part of it, but really, as Martha was saying, like the social justice aspect of it, and thinking about health holistically, and thinking about what it means to be healthy in our communities. And so part of that work was bringing up wages, even though a lot of our work is also working with environmentalists, a little bit about what both of y'all are touching on, in terms of making sure that we also have lower emissions in our community, bringing down the rates of the use of pesticides, not just in the farm fields, but even the ones being used in our communities. But to get back to what you're saying, David, when we started to do this research, we commissioned a report in 2013 called The State of Working Sonoma that provided us a full context of the landscape of who's doing the low wage work and what are the issues that are impacting them. And we realized that as we work hand in hand with healthcare workers to train them, to have them start thinking about social justice and integrating with our immigrant and farm worker community, we also needed to work on one of the biggest issues that healthcare providers told us was a barrier, which were wages. That at the end of the day, you could bring a farm worker or an immigrant worker into a clinic and get them full care. And if they didn't have the wages to get their medicine or to make it to a follow-up visit because of the transportation issues, we're in a very rural area. We don't have a lot of buses or public transportation like cities do. Then ultimately the care that our healthcare providers gave fell short. So that really helped us launch into some more active campaigns and coalition building. And last year we raised the wage by $3 an hour in 4 cities across North Bay, and moved forward now into the entire county of Sonoma, which put an average of $2,900 extra in each immigrant worker's pocket last year.
That's great to hear. And there are some glimmers of hope in the US with that minimum wage issue. A state that voted one way, voted for the same $15 minimum wage for its entire state workers in the state, excuse me. Shelley, touching upon the issue of job opportunities, I know that your organization to that.
Oh, yes, sorry, you just broke up there. Yes, basically Cape Town Western Cape has huge unemployment issues here. We're sitting on nearly 60% of youth between the ages of 15 and 24 that don't have work. There's a lot of entrepreneurship here, but a lot of the entrepreneurs and the small businesses obviously don't take on many workers. So really the large vineyards which are in Stellenbosch are predominantly those that give most of the workers within Blinkenbos, the casual harvesting work that they have, which I think is why it's probably the fastest growing township in the Western Cape, because a lot of people flock there from other parts of South Africa, especially from Northern Cape and Eastern Cape, looking for work. And they know that there is a very, very large sort of wine scene going on there in Stellenbosch. You literally drive down the road and there's a wine farm every few yards. So there's always lots of sort of casual work available for them. But again, it's very casual and it's very, you know, interim and not consistent at all. And, you know, there's very little sort of minimum wage here. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's just really awful politically. So what we do is we, especially with the COVID response, what we've been doing is putting in hand washing stations within the community. Because the city was providing them, they were actually putting in some large tanks of water, but we know with COVID and with many diseases, waterborne diseases that, as well, that you can't get rid of that off your hands unless you're using soap, because it actually breaks down the fatty barrier around the virus. So what we've been doing specifically within schools as well, because the schools opened actually earlier here than a lot of places in the world, is we actually installed hand washing units, which was large tanks of liquid soap with a push button dispenser. And we also built, again, infrastructure in terms of taps, which were connected up to the water tanks. And each of those tanks that we put into the community, or each of those stations that we put into the community, usually it's sort of like large foot count areas like the taxi ranks, outside the TB clinics, outside churches, outside HIV clinics. We have a station ambassador. So again, we've been trying to target females in terms of taking those ambassador roles on. So each of the stations has an ambassador. They're given a proper sanitation kit, and they have like a daily checklist that they go through, and they go and check that station every few hours. They sanitize the outside of it. They check to make sure there's not been any damage. They check to see the level of the soap, they check to see the level of the water in the tanks, and then they report back to our project managers of those stations when they need refills of water and soap, or if they require any maintenance work where something's been damaged. So each of those ambassadors, we provide them with a stipend every month, and provide them with airtime, and so they can get in touch with us. So we're trying to provide as many job opportunities as we can. And also what we do within our labour force is, for each of the stations, we have to build these large cement plinths that we put the 5,000 litre tanks on. And so what our team does, we have a project manager, and they use the local community. So we have like 5 labourers per station that build the plinths. And that's very easy work in terms of mixing cement and actually putting that together. So we always use as many of the local people that we can in terms of those teams. As well as the steel boxes which we make to put our liquid soap in. Unfortunately, you know, within the townships, unless it's literally like chained down, it will get stolen for selling any kind of scrap metal or anything. So they do have to be very, very indestructible in that sense.
Yes, and mixing cement is hard work. I've done it on a few occasions. I don't envy anybody who has that task. Marta, if you could please address the issues of, well, now that we understand that what's happening in the world, there's greater understanding and the use of the word crisis. We have a climate crisis. Yes, it's a change, but it's truly a crisis, as evidenced by many things that have been happening in greater amounts as time goes on. Can you please speak to how it is Porto Protocol and its members are addressing this in terms of applying solutions?
Okay. I'll start with Porto Protocol as an organization.
Thank you.
What we aim to do is, in a way, save time, because there is no time to save in regards to the climate crisis, and also save resources. And the idea and the purpose behind is to build everything we do on collaborative sharing and building a collective voice within the wine world at a global scale. And how do we want to do this? The idea is that members, in this case, not only wine producers, but any company or individual that is spread across the wine value chain, and that means from grape to glass, that is already having some kind of climate action. And it doesn't matter whether you're just starting or whether you're a champion, to share with us. And with this, and when I mean with us, is with this Porto Protocol community, what they're doing. And that means that, for example, if you're a producer in Portugal or in South Africa or in Sonoma County, and you're doing something, for example, that has to do with water management, for example, or or if, for example, you have an amazing solar panel system and you're self-sustainable in terms of energy, or if you're sequestering carbon out of the fermentation process in wine, that you share with this community what you are doing. And that means whatever other producer on the other side of the world can learn from you and can replicate what you're doing, therefore saving resources in searching for solutions and also saving time in responding to climate change. And so in general, this is what we as an organization are doing. And of course, from an individual perspective, from our members, they are dealing with this in various different ways. Some are looking at it holistically in a systemic fashion, and they're trying to address climate change from grape to glass again, from the way they are producing their grapes to the way they are packaging their wine, which is absolutely relevant in terms of climate change for wine. Others are just starting to wake up, so to speak, to what is happening and to acknowledge this crisis. So some of them already had some environmental practices, not because of climate change, but just because they wanted to have them or because they believed they were right. And they're just starting with little things, and they're starting to try to understand how can they do more. And so the way they are acting towards climate changes from member to member. And that the idea is that they are all able to learn from each other and therefore collaborate with each other.
As someone who was there in the early days of the development of the Porto Protocol, I can say wholeheartedly that this shared knowledge base, it's not quite open source, it's not quite closed source, but joining the Porto Protocol is not difficult. But this knowledge base shared amongst people in the wine sector who are owning various businesses, not just wineries per se, but other ones adjacent to the wine business, is a way of multiplying this knowledge and sharing these positive efforts to change and better what we're all trying to achieve here on multiple levels. Before we wrap it up, I want to ask that each one of you just quickly chime in with just one last thing that maybe you didn't get to say. So starting with Mara, is there anything more you'd like to add before we call an end to this webinar?
Yeah, thanks, David. I guess I just want to quickly give a quick landscape of where we're at for folks, because, you know, here in wine country in Sonoma and Napa, we bring in tourists from all over the country, or sorry, all over the world every year. And our wine industry brings in $4 billion annually. And, you know, about half of that goes into the profits of this community. And so that really, this industry and this economy really ensures that our economy thrives here locally in this very rural area. But we also know that we have an estimated 40,000 people here who are undocumented and are seeking a pathway to citizenship. And we know that at least 12,000 of those are farm workers. And contrary to this myth that farm workers just migrate up here from Latin America and leave, actually, our data shows that 9 out of 10 of our farm workers live here year round. Their children go to these schools, they use our parks, they buy the groceries here, and yet they are, you know, the most likely to live in poverty and the most likely to be rent burdened and the most likely to miss meals in their home, according to our local hunger index. So, you know, I just want to continue to encourage folks to support organizations like all of ours, you know, doing this incredible work to ensure that our wine industry is taking care of our farm workers, because we know that it's, first of all, it's just good business to ensure that we can sustain our workers for the long road, because, you know, historically we've seen farm workers become winery owners themselves or pass it on to their children. And here in Sonoma County, we have a lot of farm workers whose parents and grandparents came here to be farm workers. But we also just know that every worker should be able to come to work with dignity and to feel like they don't have to make a sacrifice to do their work. And so much of our campaign is making sure that folks are not only recovering from the fires, but that if farm workers are going into mandatory evacuation zones and putting their lives on the line, that means that they're taken care of and they're given all the highest health and safety standards and equipment possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mara. And Shelley.
Yes, I mean, the wine industry has been hit so badly here. I mean, in terms of, day zero that we experienced here in Cape Town in 2018, where we literally got no rain for 3 years. And we were down, in 2018, in like sort of March, April, we were down to only being able to have 25 litres a day per person. And obviously the wine industry and agriculture in general got hit hugely by that. And yet agriculture was one of those things that really, saved day zero in that regard, in terms of like really cutting down on what they were using. But obviously, to the detriment, I'm sure, of much of the food and wine that was produced here. And then again with COVID, I mean, we, in Cape Town again, in South Africa, we had the harshest lockdown, in terms of we were the only country in the world that we weren't allowed for 3 months. We weren't allowed to buy alcohol. Obviously the wine industry got hit hugely there in locally. And I know that the export business was really affected during those first few months of COVID also. So yeah, the wine industry here has been hit really badly. And we're really hoping that we can all strive to help it grow here again.
Thank you, Shelley. And Marta.
I think a lot of what Mara and Shelley said speak for what I have to say. At the end of the day, the wine industry, first of all, the wine industry is not just agriculture, but it does start in agriculture. So as Mara was saying, we are talking about an industry that has been, that many times is in the same family for decades. And so we have to look out for the future. That's a really important message. So whatever we do today, we have to be guardians of the lands. And when we look at climate change, and when we heard what Mara and Shelley said, this is climate change. This is part of this is all part of this holistic and incredible challenge that we are facing as a species. And so from where we stand as Porto Protocol, we are a click away. Whatever, if you are somewhat in the middle of the wine value chain, do join us and share what we're doing. And we benefit all at the end of the day. I mean, if you share what we're doing, if we completely change the way we're thinking and just acknowledge that this is a challenge that we have to face up to, whether we like it or not. And it is through social justice and looking at water, and you felt it with Day Zero, that can stop coming out of our tap, which is something that luckily you have not experienced. This is all climate change. And we need climate action. And there's so much being done around the world, with so much. And I'll give you just 3 examples. I mean, we spoke to Spear the other day from South Africa, and not so much from Sonoma, but I remember Frog's Leap. We have members doing amazing things. And if we come together, and that's the message, if we come together, we can do this, because the solutions are out there. And what we are trying to do as an institution is bring them all together so that it makes it easier and faster for us to tackle this challenge that we're facing. Thank you, David, for the invitation. And thank you, Shelley and Mara. It was inspirational to hear you.
Thanks, Marta. I think what Marta had touched upon here kind of sums up what Wine Future 2021 is trying to achieve. The problems are complex, they're multilateral, they're multinational, they're very nuanced, and they're complicated. And complicated problems have complicated solutions. I want to thank all 3 of you for the work your organizations are doing to help to resolve issues and solve problems that are affecting your communities on all levels. The work that you're doing should invigorate people who are watching now and will attend Wine Future 2021 to tell other people about Wine Future 2021, so that we can benefit your organizations as our designated donation recipients for Wine Future 2021. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you to the 3 of you for speaking and presenting. And I look forward to seeing everybody come back in 2 weeks' time when we have our 3rd webinar. Thank you all, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you.